Welcome to the Sky Commander Flight Brief. It's your mission-ready podcast for drone pilot training and aerial insights across Canada.
From Transport Canada rules to real-world drone ops, we break it down, take you higher, and help you earn your wings. Because here at skycommander.ca, we don't just fly.
It hints there's more to it. It's a masterclass, a deeper level, maybe a philosophy or a community focus, perhaps.
It's definitely intriguing, sets them apart from just, a basic tips show. Skycommander.ca is the obvious next step. Precisely. If you're thinking about flying a drone in Canada, boom, this content is aimed right at you.
Powered by skycommander.ca.
The elite podcast for Canada's drone pilot. Okay, let's get started. You're a certified Part 107 remote pilot.
Right.
You've been flying almost constantly, maybe building a really thriving business. We're talking advanced industrial inspection, utility work, maybe some high-end cinematography.
The real professional stuff.
Exactly. You've just landed the biggest contract of your quarter, and Monday morning is the big day. You're just doing a final sanity check on the paperwork. You pull out your physical remote pilot certificate, and that knot just forms instantly in your stomach. The date of your initial test, or maybe your last renewal, was 25 months ago. You're late?
Yeah.
Did your certification just expire? Are you grounded? Did you just lose that massive contract?
That panic is completely visceral, and I think it hits thousands of professional pilots every single year, especially the ones who are, really focused on the operations side and not so much the admin side.
Yeah.
But the good news, and this is really the core of our deep dive today, is that the rules around your Part 107 currency are designed to be much more forgiving and definitely much cheaper than that initial wave of fear suggests.
That is exactly where we're focusing our attention today. This whole deep dive is dedicated to FAA Part 107 recurrent training. Our mission here is to strip away all the complex regulatory jargon, the confusion around the deadline, and just pull out the essential, actionable facts about that critical 24-month knowledge requirement.
Yeah, and we're going to clarify how the entire renewal process really transformed a few years back. It switched from, a frustrating, costly in-person test to a free, online, and critically, a much more user-friendly system.
And we won't stop there.
No. We're going to use the recurrent training curriculum itself as a kind of map to explore the key, high-value safety knowledge you gain from it, especially when it comes to the new privileges like routine night operations and flying over people.
We've been analyzing transcripts from legal experts, parsing the FAA's own legal definitions, and cross-referencing industry guides. We're connecting all the dots for you so you get a complete, clear, professional picture of compliance and liability. We want you to walk away from this discussion not just compliant, but genuinely prepared.
And before we really start that 24-month clock, let's just quickly set the baseline. You're a Part 107 pilot listening to this, so the certificate lets you fly commercially, for profit, or for a business.
We're going beyond the basics today.
Right, but let's just confirm, we're all on the same page with this one foundational number. The minimum drone weight that needs FAA registration is 0.55 pounds.
Or 250 grams.
Exactly, 250 grams. If you are flying anything heavier than that under Part 107, which most commercial pilots are, you absolutely must be registered.
Okay, let's start the clock now. Section 1, getting right to the heart of it, the 24-month clock. Certificate versus currency, what actually happens at 24 months?
This is where we need to clarify what exactly runs out every 2 years. The foundational rule we're talking about is found in 14 CFR section 107.65, aeronautical knowledge recency.
Okay, so lay out the key distinction for us, because this is where all that fear and panic comes from. What's the single biggest misconception pilots have when those 24 months are coming up?
The absolute biggest misunderstanding, without a doubt, is that the remote pilot certificate, that physical card the FAA mailed you, expires.
It doesn't.
It does not. It is permanent unless it's suspended or revoked by the FAA or you surrender it. What lapses is your aeronautical knowledge recency, which we all just call currency.
So that distinction is profound. The physical certificate itself is your permanent credential, but your legal privilege to use it, to be the person in charge of the mission, that's what vanishes.
Exactly.
It's sort of like having a driver's license that never expires, but you lose the right to drive if you don't take a safety refresher course every 2 years.
That's a perfect analogy. The rule 107.65 is very explicit. It says you cannot exercise the privileges of that certificate, meaning you can't act as the remote pilot in command, the RPIC,
right,
unless within the previous 24 calendar months you've done one of two things.
Okay.
Either you've passed the initial knowledge test again, or you've completed the FAA-specified recurrent training.
That detailed 24 calendar months, I feel like that's often misinterpreted. People are calculating 730 days, or they forget the exact day they took the test. How does the FAA actually calculate the cutoff?
The FAA calculates it to the end of the month, which is a small but really critical detail that gives you a nice buffer.
Okay.
So let's use the example from our sources. If you completed your initial test or your last recurrent training on, say, June 5, 2024,
Right.
you are current through the entirety of the 24th calendar month after that.
So 24 months later is June 2026. The fact that it was June 5th doesn't matter. It's the whole calendar month that counts.
Precisely. You are current all the way through June 30, 2026. This means that technically, you are grounded from all Part 107 operations on July 1st, 2026, if you haven't renewed by midnight the night before.
So if you start a commercial job on July 1st without doing the training, you're in violation.
You are in violation of 107.65, absolutely.
That end of the month buffer is a huge piece of knowledge. We need a way to lock that in for our pilots listening.
Definitely. Our suggested memory aid for every pilot who's been certified for more than a couple of years is simple. Nay no in 24 or you don't go.
I like that.
If you haven't refreshed your knowledge in 24 calendar months, you lose the legal privilege to fly commercially under Part 107 until you do.
That's direct and memorable. But this brings us to what might be the biggest source of relief for our listeners. Let's go back to the pilot in our opening scenario, the one who realized they slipped the deadline by 6 months. They're grounded, they lost a contract, and now they're thinking they have to repeat that whole grueling initial test.
And that initial test, it's 2 hours, 63 questions. You need a 70%, and it costs money. Repeating that would be a huge disincentive.
A huge pain.
A huge pain. But the reality, thankfully, is extremely reassuring. As long as your remote pilot certificate hasn't been suspended or revoked, you just regain your currency by completing the appropriate free online recurrent training.
Just the recurrent training, not the whole proctored exam at a testing center again.
Correct. The FAA doesn't care that you were late. They just care that you are now compliant. There is no penalty, no fine, and no extra fee for being overdue by days, weeks, or even years.
Wow.
You were just legally grounded from Part 107 operations during that time.
Yeah.
Once you complete that online course and pass the quiz, your currency is instantly reset for another 24 calendar months, starting from the month you finish it.
So you can just re-energize the certificate.
Exactly. You re-energize your permanent certificate just by proving your knowledge is up to date.
That is a massive operational relief. It means the consequence is mostly about lost opportunity during the lapse, not some bureaucratic punishment for being forgetful.
Right.
But this convenient, free online system is still pretty new. We should probably explain why the FAA shifted away from that old, expensive in-person test. Let's transition into Section 2, the Great Recurrent Pivot.
Oh, yeah. The current system is a dream for pilots compared to what we had before 2021.
Really?
The early days of Part 107, so from its start in 2016 through early 2021, it involved some significant friction points that, well, they just weren't sustainable for the agency.
So detail those old-world pain points for us. What was the logistical headache?
Well, the logistics were a real barrier, both to getting certified and staying current. Pilots had to take a recurrent knowledge test in person at an FAA-approved testing center.
Oh, that's right.
Which meant you had to schedule it, often days or weeks out, and then travel. If you live in a rural area, that could be a half-day or even a full-day commitment just to get to a testing facility.
And crucially, the cost wasn't insignificant, right? It wasn't free.
No, not at all. There was a mandatory testing fee, which could be anywhere from $150 to $200 every 2 years.
Wow.
For a hobbyist who's just using their Part 107 for a few small side gigs, that recurring cost created what we call access friction. It meant some pilots would just let their currency lapse rather than pay and travel for a test they felt they already knew the answers to.
That sounds slow, expensive, and really inflexible. And considering how fast the drone industry was growing, the FAA themselves blew way past their certification forecasts. That system just couldn't scale.
That inflexibility became a huge regulatory roadblock when the FAA needed to rapidly implement major new rules. The big catalyst for the change was the final rule for the operation of small unmanned aircraft systems over people.
Which was published on January 15th, 2021.
That's the one.
And that rule was a game changer because it introduced two major new privileges that just fundamentally changed how drone pilots operate. Routine operations at night and operations over people and moving vehicles.
Exactly. And those privileges required pilots to absorb a significant amount of new safety knowledge that just wasn't in the original 2016 Part 107 curriculum.
So the FAA realized if they stuck with the old in-person proctored test system, Rolling out these new privileges would have been impossibly slow and expensive for everyone.
It would have been a disaster. They needed a way to instantly update the knowledge of hundreds of thousands of pilots all at once without charging them or forcing them to travel.
And the solution was pretty elegant. Just transform the recurrent requirement from a physical exam into a free online training module delivered through FAASafety.gov.
Precisely. The online courses launched in April 2021. This meant pilots could renew their currency and, in the process, automatically get the training they needed to use those new privileges, like night flight, without having to apply for a separate waiver.
So this pivot allowed the FAA to manage the risk of these new privileges by mandating updated training for the entire pilot population.
Right.
This really elevates the importance of recurrent training beyond just, checking a box for compliance. It's the FAA's primary dynamic update channel. It's how they push crucial, timely regulatory and safety changes out to this massive, growing industrial workforce.
And that proactive approach is key. I mean, when the FAA introduced remote ID in September 2023, they didn't have to scramble to figure out how to test pilots on it. They just integrated that knowledge into the existing recurrent training modules. It became their go-to mechanism for managing a really fast-moving sector.
That transition leads us perfectly into Section 3, the Renewal playbook. Now that we know why the system changed, let's nail down how to use it effectively.
Okay. The official home base for Renewal for all pilots is the online platform, FAASafety.gov.
The FAA Safety Team website.
Right, the FAASafety Team website. This is where you register, you take the official training courses, and crucially, where you download your mandatory completion certificates.
And when a pilot logs in, they have to pick the right course because there are two distinct paths. And choosing the wrong one means you haven't actually met the legal requirement.
This is a crucial distinction, especially for pilots who also have a manned pilot license. There are two main activity learning course IDs, or ALC IDs, to remember.
Path A is for the vast majority of commercial drone pilots.
Path A is ALC 677. It's formally titled the Part 107 Small UAS Recurrent Non-Part 61 Pilots. This is for the person who got their 107 certificate by passing the initial test and who does not hold a separate manned pilot certificate.
No private pilot license, no commercial, nothing.
Nothing. And we had that easy mnemonic.
Right.
ALC 677 has no 6-1 pair, so no Part 61. It's the standard, most common path.
And what about Path B for the dual certificated pilot?
Path B is ALC 515, the Part 107 Small UAS Recurrent Part 61 pilots. This is specifically for those who hold a Part 61 pilot certificate, meaning they fly manned aircraft, and who have a current flight review within the last 24 calendar months.
And the mnemonic for 515?
Even simpler. If you see 61 inside, it's for Part 61 pilots.
Okay, we have to reinforce that warning we mentioned earlier. If I'm an airline pilot flying 80 hours a month and I completed my mandatory Part 61 flight review last week, am I current for my Part 107 privileges?
Absolutely not. And this is one of the most common mistakes dual certificated pilots make.
Really?
Your Part 61 flight review covers manned aviation knowledge, aerodynamics, systems, procedures for conventional aircraft. It is not a substitute for Part 107 recency. The FAA mandates that to be current under Part 107, that Part 61 pilot still has to complete the appropriate online recurrent training, ALC 515, within the 24-month window.
Because the knowledge areas are different.
Completely different, especially things like ops over people, which is unique to the unmanned world.
So no matter how experienced you are in a cockpit, you still have to spend those 2 hours on FAASafety.gov. So let's get into the content of that training now, because this is really the deep dive part. When a pilot logs into ALC 677 today, what are the main new regulatory knowledge areas they have to master?
Well, the content is really dominated by those two big rule additions that drove the online pivot in the first place. Operations at night, which we'll cover in detail in a bit, and operations over people and moving vehicles, plus the more recent mandate, remote ID.
Okay, let's start with remote ID. What specific knowledge point is the recurrent training really hammering home?
It emphasizes that remote ID compliance is absolutely mandatory. The course requires you to understand the difference between the two types of remote identification, standard remote ID and limited remote ID.
And what's the critical difference a pilot has to be able to articulate to be considered current?
Standard remote ID is typically built into the drone by the manufacturer. It's required for most operations, and it broadcasts a signal directly from the drone using Bluetooth or Wi-Fi that contains the drone's unique ID, its location, and the control station's location.
And the training clarifies a key point about that broadcast.
A very key point. It does not rely on cellular data or an internet connection to work. It's a local broadcast.
Okay, and what about limited remote ID?
That's the exception. Limited remote ID, which uses a cheaper add-on module, is only allowed if the drone is flown within your visual line of sight and within a designated FAA-recognized identification area, or FRIA.
FRAs.
Right. And the recurrent training makes sure pilots know that these FRIAs are often set up by universities or community-based organizations. If you leave the FRIA, or if that FRIA gets shut down, you have to switch to standard remote ID or stop flying.
That is important depth. Now, let's move to operations over people. This is complex because it has 4 specific categories with increasingly strict requirements. What does the recurrent training require pilots to know about Category 1?
So the training covers all 4 categories, which are defined by the risk the drone poses to people on the ground. Category 1 is the easiest, the least restrictive. The rule is simple. The drone has to weigh 0.55 pounds or 250 grams or less, and it can't have any exposed rotating parts that could lacerate human skin on impact.
So if your micro drone weighs 249 grams and has prop guards, you're Category 1 compliant right out of the box.
Exactly.
What about the higher categories 2 and 3?
Categories 2 and 3 are tied to the drone's specific kinetic energy and its potential for injury. The recurrent training really focuses on the fact that these drones have to be specifically manufactured to meet the FAA's airworthiness criteria.
And what defines those categories?
Category 2 requires that if the drone were to hit a person, it would transfer less than 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Category 3 allows for a bit more, less than 25 foot-pounds. But it mandates that the flight over people can only happen in restricted access areas where people are notified, or the flight has to be over moving vehicles.
So the key knowledge point here is that for both of these, the FAA requires specific manufacturer documentation and declarations.
Yes, often involving flight tests and very specific design standards.
This means the recurrent training is forcing pilots to understand that their operational privilege is now tied to the hardware they choose and its specific certifications, not just their own knowledge.
Exactly. And then there's Category 4, which the training also covers. This is for high-risk operations that involve standard airworthiness certificates, almost like manned aircraft. If you're flying under Category 4, you're in a whole different world of highly specialized operations, waivers, and complex maintenance.
That's a lot of new content. So let's talk about the exam itself. The training usually takes about 2 hours to review. Then there's a 45-question exam with a 90-minute time limit. And as we mentioned, it requires a 100% passing score.
Yes, 100% pass required. And this is often where pilot anxiety kicks in. But as we said, the course is designed to let you correct your wrong answers.
I want to challenge that premise a bit. If the FAA made the recurrent test 100% correctable, isn't that a sign that they care more about checking a compliance box, just making sure a pilot clicks through the material, than ensuring genuine, deep technical mastery? Where's the real incentive to study hard if you know you can just retry the questions you missed?
That's a fair challenge, and it really gets to the heart of the FAA's philosophy after 2021. The goal of the recurrent course is not to be a punitive filter, which is what the old Proctor test was.
Okay.
The goal is to be a guaranteed dissemination system for new safety information. By mandating a 100% score, even a correctable one, the FAA ensures that the pilot has to stop, review the specific material related to their wrong answer, and demonstrate mastery of that topic before they can move on.
So the 100% requirement is less about assessing your initial memory and more about forcing comprehension and engagement with the regulatory updates.
Precisely. If you miss a question on night lighting requirements, the system forces you back to lesson on 107.29, making sure that knowledge is reinforced. It's prioritizing comprehension and mastery of critical updated topics like remote ID and ops over people over just simple rote memorization. The focus has shifted from testing to training.
Okay, so once a pilot gets that 100% and passes, let's go back to the documentation. We talked about the ramp check scenario. Why is that completion certificate so important?
It is the single most critical piece of paper you have besides your physical certificate. Your completion certificate from ALC 677 or ALC 515 is your legal proof of currency. It's what satisfies 107.65. You should immediately download it and save it in multiple formats.
Like where?
A digital PDF on your phone, a PDF in your cloud storage, and even a printed copy in your flight bag.
Walk us through that ramp check scenario again in detail.
Okay. Imagine an FAA inspector, or maybe local law enforcement, approaches you on site. They ask for your required documents. You show them your remote pilot certificate. Then they ask for proof of currency.
And you say, I took the course.
Right. And that vague memory is not going to work. If you can't immediately produce the documented proof, the completion certificate showing you are within that 24-month window, the inspector has grounds to treat you as non-current. They don't have time to call FAASafety.gov and check your login history.
So even if the flight was perfect, the airspace was clear, the drone was registered, a failure to produce that one certificate means you're in violation of 107.65.
And you could face immediate grounding and potential civil penalties simply for a paperwork failure. That's the liability layer. The paper trail is your legal defense against any claim that you are operating while non-compliant.
Speaking of compliance, let's spend some significant time now on the other massive privilege unlocked by the recurrent training, routine night operations. The safety knowledge here, covered under FAR 107.29, goes way beyond regulation and into human biology. This is Section 4, Deep Dive into Night Operations.
The change in 2021 gave certified pilots the ability to fly at night without needing the old, cumbersome waiver, as long as they meet the specific requirements and complete this updated training. This is some of the most engaging content in the module because it gets into aviation biology.
Okay, first, let's nail down the technical definition of night in the regulatory sense.
For drone pilots, night is defined as the time between the end of civil twilight and the beginning of morning civil twilight.
In practical terms.
In practical terms, for the continental U.S., this is the period that starts 30 minutes after official sunset and ends 30 minutes before official sunrise. That 60-minute window around dawn and dusk is civil twilight. And during that time, you don't need the special anti-collision lighting. But the moment you transition out of civil twilight, the night requirements kick in.
And the most important requirement is the lighting. What must the small UAS have?
The drone has to have anti-collision lights that flash at a rate sufficient to avoid a collision. And this isn't just some tiny LED. The recurrent training stresses the performance standard. These lights must be visible for at least 3 statute miles.
SM.
3 statute miles. That's the magic operational number. That implies a pretty powerful light source. But that powerful light can sometimes be a problem, right? What's the subtle exception about light intensity?
The FAA knows that a really intense flashing light needed for 3-mile visibility can sometimes interfere with the RPIC's own night vision, causing a distraction or impairing their night adaptation.
So the lights may be reduced in intensity, but only when it is necessary in the interest of safety.
Can you give us an example of that?
Sure. If the drone is hovering close to you, the RPIC and the anti-collision strobe is so bright it's momentarily blinding you, you can dial down the intensity to complete the job safely. However, and the rule is absolute here, you can never reduce the intensity if a manned aircraft is known to be in the area. Manned aircraft visibility always comes first.
Okay, now let's get into the really fascinating part of the recurrent training. Human factors. The pilot's biology at night. We rely on 2 types of light receptors, cones and rods. How does night flying change which ones we rely on?
Our cones are concentrated in the center of our retina. They're what we use for central vision, for color, for sharp detail, and they rely heavily on bright light, which means at night they essentially create a functional blind spot right where we normally focus our vision. They're basically useless when it's truly dark.
So we have to rely on the rods instead.
Yes. The rods are in the periphery of the retina, and they're highly sensitive to low light, detecting shades of gray and movement. And because of the cone's night blind spot, the recurrent training mandates a change in operational technique called off-center viewing.
Explain off-center viewing.
So instead of looking directly at your drone's anti-collision light, or the thing you're trying to inspect, which would use your night blind spot, you have to learn to scan by looking slightly to the side of the object.
Why?
This strategically uses the rods in your peripheral vision, and it allows you to actually detect and track the target more effectively in low light conditions.
That seems really counterintuitive to how we operate during the day, and the time you need to transition to this mode is shocking.
The adaptation period is long, and it's very sensitive. It takes the human eye up to 30 minutes to fully adapt to the dark. It's a process called dark adaptation. 30 minutes. During that time, the rods become about 200 times more sensitive to light. Any exposure to a bright white or blue light, like quickly checking your phone screen without a red filter, can instantly destroy that adaptation, and you have to wait another half hour to fully readapt.
That explains why the training suggests using red or green lights in your cockpit or at your control station.
Exactly. Studies show the rods are least affected by light in the red-green spectrum. So using red or green filters on displays or flashlights helps preserve your dark adaptation, which is a critical safety factor for the RPIC and the visual observer.
Beyond biological limits, night flight also introduces visual illusions that are essential knowledge for recency. Let's detail the 4 key illusions covered in the recurrent training.
The first one is autokinesis. This is a psychological trick our brain plays on us. When you're looking at a stationary light source, like a distant light on a tower or a fixed star, and you just stare at it for several seconds without moving your eyes, the light will appear to move.
And why is that dangerous for a drone pilot?
If the pilot fixates on their drone's light or a landmark light, and it appears to move, especially if they lose situational awareness, they might make an unnecessary or even dangerous control input based on a threat that doesn't exist.
So how do you avoid it?
The avoidance technique is mandatory. You have to continuously scan the area and never fixate on a single light for more than a few seconds.
Okay, what's next? The one related to manned traffic.
That's the reversible perspective illusion. This is a major risk, especially when you encounter low-flying manned traffic like helicopters or general aviation planes. When an aircraft is flying directly toward you at night, if you can only see their position lights, your brain can sometimes misinterpret the direction of travel, making it look like the aircraft is flying away from you.
How does the training teach avoidance for that?
It forces the pilot to review the standard aviation position light configuration. You have to be able to correctly identify the aircraft's lights. Green on the right wing, red on the left wing, and white on the tail or back of the wing. If you see both the red and the green lights, the aircraft is moving towards you, and you might need to take extreme evasive action.
The third one is often tied to poor distance judgment.
That's the size-distance illusion. At night, our depth perception is significantly impaired. We naturally try to judge the distance of an object based on the brightness or the size of its lights. We assume brighter or bigger means closer. But this is completely unreliable.
Why?
Because the light's intensity can vary due to atmospheric conditions, or the angle of the light, or just the drone setup. A small, close drone might appear just as bright as a large, distant manned aircraft. The avoidance: do not rely solely on size or brightness for distance judgment.
And finally, the really unsettling biological one that can cause vertigo.
Flicker vertigo. This is a physiological reaction caused by staring at a light that's flashing within a critical frequency range, usually between 4 and 20 cycles per second.
And this can cause?
It can cause unpleasant and dangerous physical reactions like nausea, vomiting, confusion, and vertigo, leading to spatial disorientation. The avoidance is simple. Do not fixate on any flashing light in that range.
This whole expansion on night ops really shows why recurrent training is so vital. It's not about relearning airspace you already know. It's about absorbing new, specialized knowledge for new operational privileges.
It absolutely elevates the required knowledge base, and that knowledge base is your ultimate protection.
Which leads us directly into Section 5, professionalism, risk, and the legal backstop. This isn't just about unlocking night privileges. It's about protecting your business from massive liability.
Currency is fundamentally your primary layer of legal defense. If your knowledge recency lapses, you expose yourself and your company to significant liability, both from the FAA and potentially from civil lawsuits or insurance claims.
Let's trace the legal problem back to the foundational regulations, starting with 107.12, the rule about who can manipulate the controls.
107.12 is crystal clear. If your recency lapses, you instantly lose the ability to act as the RPIC. And what's more, you can't even manipulate the controls as an unsupervised pilot. Your utility just plummets.
So what can you do?
If you're non-current, you're relegated to being a visual observer, or you have to operate only under the direct, instantaneous supervision of a current RPIC who can immediately take over the controls.
So if a pilot takes a commercial job while out of recency, they have already committed a regulatory violation before the drone even leaves the ground. And that violation immediately impacts the serious responsibilities in 107.19.
Precisely. 107.19 establishes the RPIC as the final authority, ensuring compliance with all applicable regulations. Flying while out of recency is a violation of 107.65. Now think about this scenario. A pilot who is out of recency has a drone accident. Maybe it drifts into a power line, or worse, it results in a serious injury that requires an overnight hospital stay, which has to be reported to the FAA.
The investigation into that incident just got significantly more complicated and hostile.
Exactly. Even if the incident was due to factors outside the pilot's control, say an unexpected wind shear, the investigation is made much worse because the pilot was already operating illegally by violating 107.65. This non-compliance is taken very seriously by the FAA, and it significantly increases the likelihood of civil penalties or fines.
Which can be huge.
They can reach into the tens of thousands of dollars depending on the severity of the violation and your prior record.
And beyond the FAA, the risk hits you in the wallet through your insurance. Can you give us a concrete example of how non-currency can lead to an insurance claim denial?
Absolutely. Commercial drone insurance policies are written based on the assumption that the pilot is operating legally. If you have a loss, say, $50,000 in property damage, and the insurer investigates and finds you were out of recency, that fact alone gives them grounds to claim noncompliance without applicable regulations.
And they can deny the claim.
They can argue that you violated the terms of the certificate required to operate the aircraft commercially, thereby voiding the policy coverage for that specific incident.
And how is that different from a denial based on, say, operational error, like flying too low?
Well, operational error is often covered, subject to deductibles. But flying out of currency is a status violation. It's a binary yes or no compliance issue. If you're not current, your policy might essentially be nullified for that mission, leaving you or your company financially exposed for the entire amount of damages. It's a risk no professional pilot should ever take.
So given this extreme liability, what is the professional strategy? How do elite pilots manage this renewal process, not as a burden, but as a proactive business decision? They're not waiting for month 24.
The best practice is what we call the buffer strategy. Never, ever wait for the last month.
What's a recommended renewal rhythm for a professional operation?
Elite operators target their renewal around month 21 or 22 after their last completion date. So if you renewed in January 2024, your deadline is the end of January 2026. A professional pilot should schedule and complete ALC 677 sometime between October and December of 2025.
And that 2-3 month buffer is critical. Why?
It just accounts for life happening. What if a massive client job requires you to be out of the country for 2 months, or you get sick, or the FAASafety.gov website is down for maintenance, all of which can happen? That buffer ensures you never accidentally go out of currency. If you always renew early, you guarantee continuity of operations.
And we also need to address the broader context of professional development here. The recurrent training should be more than just passing a quiz.
It should be treated as a 360-degree pit stop for your entire operation. Use the renewal process as the trigger for a mandatory operational review.
What does that look like?
This means updating all your pre-flight checklists to account for remote ID, reviewing recent LANC updates in your high-traffic zones, and maybe even conducting internal scenario drills on emergencies like lost link procedures, especially when combined with night operations. The knowledge refresher should translate directly into improved operational safety procedures.
Final point on liability and training. If a large construction firm or a utility company puts its pilots through a rigorous annual internal training program, 3 full days of scenario-based training, does that count toward 107.65?
That's the ultimate misconception for corporate drone programs. No matter how robust, expensive, or high quality that internal company training is, it does not count for satisfying 107.65.
It has to be the FAA course.
The law is rigid. The only way to satisfy the legal requirement is the FAA sanctioned course, ALC 677 or 515, or retaking the initial knowledge test. Internal training is excellent for proficiency and skill, but it is not a replacement for legal currency.
So internal training is a supplement, never a substitution. That clarity is vital. Now, to broaden our scope, understanding the U.S. framework is crucial, but many professionals operate regionally or look at global standards. Let's expand our view in Section 6 to see how the U.S. system compares with Canada's.
Yeah, looking at Canada's regulatory system, specifically ER Part 9X for basic and advanced operations, provides some excellent context.
Yeah.
Because even though they're two different national aviation authorities, the FAA and Transport Canada, they share a lot of the same underlying philosophy.
What's the core shared DNA between the two regulators when it comes to pilot currency?
They share two fundamental structural elements that really define the professional standard for unmanned systems. First, the 24-month rhythm is mandated by both regulators. Every pilot has to refresh their essential knowledge every 2 years. And second, they share the certificate currency split. The pilot certificate itself is permanent and doesn't expire, but the legal ability to use it, the operational currency lapses if that 24-month recency requirement isn't met. The core principle is universal. You can't justify complex operations tomorrow based on knowledge you learned several years ago.
So, same philosophy, same time frame, but they use vastly different mechanisms to achieve it. Let's detail the difference in mechanism.
The U.S. approach is standardized and mandatory. It's a high degree of control. You must take the specific, structured online course, ALC 677 or 515, on FAASafety.gov. It involves detailed training modules on new rules, followed by an exam where you have to demonstrate a 100% comprehension.
And Canada provides more options and, well, trusts the pilot more.
Yes, Transport Canada offers more flexibility. Canadian pilots have to complete an approved recency activity every 24 months. And while they can rewrite the regulatory exam or take an approved course, the most common and lightweight option is the Transport Canada self-paced recency questionnaire.
What does that questionnaire look like?
It's essentially an open book quiz or a study document that covers the key regulatory changes and safety concepts. The pilot completes this document, signs it, and just keeps it for their records as proof of recency. Transport Canada relies heavily on the pilot's professional commitment and, frankly, the honor system to complete this self-study diligently.
That's a fascinating contrast. The FAA enforces compliance through a structured, mandatory tested course, while Transport Canada relies on self-attestation via a self-paced document.
But the result is the same. Both require documented proof that the pilot has refreshed their knowledge within 24 months across the big 5 pillars of aviation knowledge air law, airspace, weather, human factors, and operational procedures.
This comparison is incredibly valuable. By understanding both systems, the listener becomes almost bilingual in air law. They realize the underlying pattern of risk mitigation is consistent globally. The need to manage human factors and airspace, even if the regulatory mechanisms are different.
It makes you a stronger, more sophisticated pilot because it forces you to think about the principle behind the rule, not just memorizing the local language. You understand that recurrent training is a universal professional requirement, not just some FAA bureaucratic hurdle.
This has been a truly essential deep dive into the operational requirements of Part 107 currency. So here's your final summary for today.
Recurrent training via the specific ALC course 677 or 515 on FAASafety.gov is free, it's online, and it's due every 24 calendar months to the end of the month. It is absolutely necessary not just for compliance, but to keep your high-value operational privileges, especially routine night operations and flying over people legally energized.
And remember, the goal is not just compliance, which is the legal floor set by 107.65. The goal is proficiency and competency, which is the professional ceiling. By adhering to that 24-month rhythm, you proactively manage your legal liability, you avoid catastrophic insurance denials, and you ensure you are never grounded when that high-value contract comes through. We've seen that recurrent training is the FAA's best mechanism to manage the massive and rapidly professionalizing population of remote pilots, over 427,000 strong. They use this channel to integrate critical new safety knowledge quickly.
And this leads directly to our final provocative thought for you to consider until our next deep dive. We have now absorbed night operations, ops over people, and remote ID through the recurrent mechanism. What new complex regulatory knowledge, what new operational frontier will the FAA be forced to push into the ALC 677 and ALC 515 courses during the next 24-month cycle to keep pace with the inevitable rollout of high-risk operations like Beyond Visual Line of Sight or BVLOS and the future Part 108 framework? Stay current, stay ahead, because the moment you stop learning is the moment your professional privilege to operate effectively expires, regardless of the date on your certificate.
That's a wrap on today's mission, Commander. See above, go beyond, get ahead. For more training, tools, and intel, head to skycommander.ca. If you learned something new, share it, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star debrief.